Welcome everyone to the PJ's Cast. I'm your host Pierce, and joined with me today is a very special guest, Taylor Newby of the Hockey News. How's it going, Taylor?
Good, good. We're getting into hockey. Stars been playing well, so that's been fun.
Mm-hmm. So we're obviously going to talk about the Stars, but I want to first ask you, how was it like going to Finland and covering the global series between the Stars and the Panthers?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, despite the disappointing outcome. But it was really nice to see like all the Finnish fans, how many people traveled from both Texas and Florida, and seeing how they do things, and then just how much it meant to like the Finnish fans to one see their like an NHL team in general, but people from their country. So that was really interesting and really fun to watch.
Yeah, like obviously in North America here, like we're used to watching the NHL, but over in Europe, especially in countries like Finland, Sweden, it's hard to catch NHL teams because there's so many hours ahead. Like a lot of the times, you got to stay up till like later in the middle of the night to catch the game. So, but it's a
Yeah.
truly like great experience to actually watch an NHL game in Finland or Sweden or wherever in Europe. I want to ask you, like, how was Finland like not just like watching the games there, but like were there some certain places you got to explore while you were there?
A little bit. It was actually a holiday weekend when I was there, so everything was
Mm-hmm.
closed. It was All
Oh,
Saints
okay,
weekend.
okay.
And then I actually did like a whole Europe trip where I went through Germany, Denmark, Sweden. So I wasn't there as early as some of the other media. And the day we got
Mm-hmm.
there, it ended up snowing like 6 inches, which is a lot for people from Texas. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
wasn't. It was all so pretty, like snow covered, but I didn't get to see what it looked like before. But yeah, we went to a few restaurants, had like reindeer pizza.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I know that Rope Hens' favorite meal was the salmon soup. We couldn't find anywhere with that. So that was a little disappointing. But yeah, we got to see just some of the little towns. We went to like the markets. We went to a hockey store. My family got some like Finnish jerseys. So we did a little bit, but a lot of stuff was closed, unfortunately.
Well, it still sounds like you had a fun time there.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to go to Finland again. Really anywhere like in Europe, but particularly Finland, Sweden, I would say that's probably at the top of my list. And yeah, I
Yeah.
bet people traveling from Texas and Florida to watch the games, like you're like always like warm weather, and then probably going traveling up there to Finland where it's snowing and probably a bit more cold, not as much sunlight. That's probably definitely a change of pace there. Um,
Mm-hmm.
on to the Stars. My first question I have is being a Chicago Blackhawks fan, like I think the Dallas Stars are the best ran organization in the NHL because to me they're set up to not only win now but like for the
Yeah.
next 5 years, I would say, and that's to me that's the best position your team can be in. And there's other teams like Vegas where they just trade every draft pick or prospect they have to get
Yeah.
the superstar, whereas Dallas has taken a way more patient approach, but that's paid off for them because they've gotten some tremendous like players on their team. I think of when they originally traded for Tyler Sagan and Jamie Benn was still young, like that's well over 10 years ago now. And
Mm-hmm.
then, a few years later, they get Amir Heiskanen, Jake Ottinger, and Jason Robertson in the same dress. Everyone talks about that, rightfully so. But then another few years later, you get Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stanko in the same draft. So like every few years, they either make a big trade or they just hit big in the draft to keep this going and really build up the depth in their organization. And I don't really think they have any holes. Like they're good everywhere. But what to you are some like could be a missing piece for this team to finally take the step and win the Stanley Cup because they've done everything right but won a Stanley Cup.
Yeah. I think to your point about like the drafting, I think it's impressive because they never really went through a rebuild period
No,
on top of that. So it wasn't like they were getting outside of the 2017, they weren't getting super high draft picks either.
no.
So I think that's the most impressive part of that. And then the 2017 draft class kind of changed, it really turned the organization around because you had three key pieces and now you've got, a solid team again, and then you can move forward. But to answer your question, I think right now what they're really struggling with is finding someone to go with Robo and Rope Hintz. That's something they've kind of shuffled around all season. I think currently the difference between this year and last year's team is the defensive depth. If you watch like late into the playoffs last year, we were only able to play like 2 defensive pairings because of the way we were set up last year. So I think adding the defensive depth, we had Labushkin, which he's been surprisingly pleasant. I wasn't sure what really to expect of him, but he is not only just a stay-at-home defenseman, he's doing his job, and that's all we needed him to do. We've got him with Thomas Harley, who moves the puck and plays the offensive game. But he's actually surprisingly started getting some points. Last night he got assists on both goals from Mason Marchment. So yeah, I think he's got a few. And then Brendan Smith also slotted in for Matt Dumba when he got healthy scratch a couple of games, and he got 3 points in those 2 games. And then we've got Niels Lundqvist, who, struggled last couple years being in the lineup. But now he's getting in the lineup every night. He worked on his defensive game, which is what they asked of him, almost to the point where now they're like, okay, you need to start incorporating offense back. So I think that's like the main thing that they were really wanting to do this offseason was get some depth. So not only do we have a 7th defenseman that can come in and play well, we also have Leon Bischel in the AHL, that we're all kind of waiting to come up because he's a big body, and add some bite that the Stars did not have last year. This year, Brendan Smith has been really good for us, and he and Matt Dumba fought last night against the Wild. So we added some bite, some physicality, and just some defensive depth. I think now they're just trying to find the right combination of forwards to really like push them over the edge into what they want. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Like I live in Edmonton, so I got to watch the Stars like up close last year with them playing in the conference final, and to me it just felt like the Stars were so gassed after playing a 7-game series against the Golden Knights, and then having to go to 6 games against the Avalanche, I think with a few overtime games there. It really just seems like they ran out of gas at the end there. And you like in the playoffs, you need to run like you probably need like 10, maybe not 10, but pretty close to 10 NHL caliber defensemen because it's just so physically grueling. And I thought of Chris Tanev last year was just a perfect fit for the Stars, and I think of the Stars so highly that like I get why they didn't sign that contract, but when they signed both like Dumba and Labushkin, I was like, well, that's interesting. We'll have to see how that plays out. But it seems like it's paying off so far. I feel like they have so much forward depth, and this kind of leads into my next question. Like, do you think this could be the year that the Stars make a big swing? Because again, they've been so patient with all their prospects. It has paid off, but they don't really trade their first round picks. They don't trade their prospects. Could this be the year that they take a big swing and maybe go after, I don't know. It's so early on. There's so many, like we're going to find out what the names are going to be soon. But one name I do see a lot is like Rasmus Anderson from Calgary, as an example.
Yeah. I think, in the past like 2 years, because we went to the Western Conference Final both times, Jim Nill has been pretty open about not selling the farm. In return, because he thinks it's, puts him in a position of power because we do have the prospects and we do have the talent. But he knows like we don't have to get rid of it to get the player we want. We ended up because Tanev was like a 3rd or 2nd round pick. It wasn't even, it wasn't like, it wasn't like we had to trade Maverick Bourque. So I know that Jim Nill is really smart about that. But I do feel like if he feels like this year they did make, the changes to get them over the hump, not once, but twice, like 1 year we lost because of whatever reason. Last year, it just did feel like we were gassed and we didn't have the depth. So he's addressing those. And I do feel like if he thought we were right there, he would swing big, but he's just such a smart GM that I don't think he'll have to be quite honest. It always feels like he gets what he wants and pays like the absolute minimum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like not only the Tanev trade, but trades they've made in years past where
Hmm.
like being a Blackhawks fan, I remember the Stars trading for Domi. I think it was only a second round pick. Yeah, a lot of the
Yeah.
moves they made have worked out with not really trading any like a first round pick or any high end
Hmm.
prospects. So that's a very good point. It's good to have a GM that gets the players what he wants without having to trade those high end assets. But I just wonder like what's it gonna come to a time where maybe not like desperate's the right word, where it's like, okay, we're gonna make a big move here and really
Hmm.
solidify things for a cup run because again, they've done everything but win. I think they're set up for a while, but it doesn't last forever. So if you have a chance to make a big trade that makes sense for you, I think you should do it, especially if that player has term on their contract.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I definitely think he would if he saw it that way. Fortunately, he's just put us in a position to not have to do that, and it even comes down to contracts. Like we've got Matt Duchene for $3 million for the second year in a row because he wants to be here, and I think that's another aspect of it is the players. They want to come here because they're winning right now. They're really there. It's a chance to take a run at the cup, but it's also just a really good organization. I know it has a really good reputation around the league. So it may also come down to them telling him like, I don't want to go anywhere except for Dallas. I know that Chris Tanev's list was pretty short and we were on it. So I think that also helps too.
I think last year with Chris Town, pretty sure the Oilers offered a first for Tana, but Calgary's like, no, we're not trading you to Edmonton. And of course,
Yeah.
Dallas, like pounced all over that. That makes perfect sense.
Hmm.
Um, Kind of onto the individual players of the team that I have some questions about. Um, Jason Robertson, I want to ask what's been happening with him because he came onto the scene, had such a very good rookie year, I think, in that shortened 2021 season, and then a year after, like he's point per game, and then a year after that, he's like 100-point player, and
Hmm.
then last year, like didn't drop down like crazy, still very respectful around like around point per game player, but this year it's kind of been a bit of a slow start for him. So I'm just wondering, like, is he in a bit of a funk right now, or what's happening with Jason Robertson?
So I think last year, I know like Stars fans and fans around the league really thought that he dropped off. But I think the way that the team was set up last year, where they were rolling 4 even lines, before that we were like almost a one-line team. It was Joe Pavelski, Rope Hintz, Jason Robertson, and that's about all they had for, especially when Rick Bowness was the coach. So they were playing close, like 18, 19 minutes a game. Whereas last year, they were all getting pretty close, like an even 15 minutes. And I think that is something that people didn't take into consideration was that line didn't have to, carry the team because they had 3 other lines that were scoring. And, the Mason Marchment, Matt Duchene, Tyler Seguin line, they, emerged and it was almost like they were the top line last year. So I think that's part of it is they're not always getting the, offensive faceoffs. They're not always on the ice when you need a goal. And then that also allowed him to work on his defensive game. His defensive game last year really came to make him a well-rounded player, whereas the years before, not that it was lacking, but it just he was an offensive player. Now he's got that incorporated into his game. He's not like the strongest skater, but he's making his he's doing other things that kind of make it that a mute point. I think this year, I know he's talked about his shooting percentage is down. He's not taking as many shots. And I think it also has to do with they're just really struggling to find someone who pairs well with Jason Robertson and Rope Hintz. I think they were kind of hoping that Maverick Bourque was going to work out a little bit more than he has. Because if you've noticed that line and then Jamie Benn, Wyatt, and Logan, like those 2 lines have kind of shuffled because they're trying to find the best pairing for all of them and who complements each other the best. But if you pull, Wyatt Johnston off that line, then that line kind of has some holes. So I think it's going to come down to finding another player to really like gel that line. And then I think Jason Robertson will start to hit his stride because we're also not seeing the same production out of Rope Hintz. And I actually was talking to some of the other media members at the last home game, and I asked, like, when do we consider kind of splitting them up to see if there's other like lines they can be with, and who really complements their skills and their game. So I don't think they're worried about it. I think it just comes down to finding who works with Jason Robertson and what his game is, because he's so smart. He's very smart with the puck. But I do think he needs to shoot more. I think up until this point, they've done a lot of like extra passes that have been broken up, or, taken away a chance that was there.
Yeah, it just seems like it's so early on in the season right now. Dallas has a great record, and again, they're probably favorites to win the Stanley Cup. It just seems like almost like champagne problems, where it's like, oh, our guy who's gotten 100 points in the past and like is point per game more often than not is not doing so well, and kind of scuffling a little bit. But it's like, if he just goes on like a few games where he gets points, like that's all forgotten. So yeah, it just speaks to how well Dallas is built. It's like, I don't think that's a huge talking point, but I was kind of just looking through the players on Dallas. It's like, ooh, Jason Robertson's having a bit of a slow start, because I'm so used to him like getting so many points, and I feel like he isn't talked about enough as like a really good player around the NHL. On to another player I have a question about. Off the show, I like mentioned Jamie Benn. He's been there the longest. He's the captain. This is the final year of his contract. Are the Stars have like anything planned out to get a contract extension done with him, or are they not really worried about that right now?
So Jim Nill actually talked about that before the season started. He said that like Jamie did not want to talk about it or worry about it this season, and that he was, a Dallas Star for life, and he was going to do whatever he needed to do for the team to win. So I expect him to take, a pretty big pay cut, just because he makes 9.5, I think, a year. So yeah, but he made it pretty clear he didn't want to worry about it during the season. But he told Jim, no, like, there's nothing to worry about. I want to stay here. So yeah, I was wondering if he was going to have, a bit of a contract year, and as some players do, and, pop off, which that's, still an option as they're trying to figure out the lines. But yeah, it's something that we did ask about.
Another question, like, who do you think are some players on the Stars that aren't getting enough attention, that are like underrated and could be a big part of the team, like going into the playoffs?
I think for sure the media has even asked Pete DeBoer, like, who's the most underrated player and why is it Colin Blackwell? Because he, what was he, like, second line for y'all last year?
Yeah, he got some pretty big minutes. He scored a hat trick. Like, I loved Colin Blackwell. It sucked to see him leave.
Yeah,
but like to see him sign in Dallas, like that's probably best case scenario for him.
Yeah, he's been really good for our fourth line. And so there's a lot of plays that he makes, the PK, him and Sam Steele are so good at the PK, and it just works. And then because he had, second line minutes and like that offensive game as well, that's really what, the Stars are going for as far as being really deep team, and, every line can score. But I think, outside of this last week, Mason Marchment is pretty underrated. It's hard to be underrated when you score like 9 points in like 3 games. So yeah, this week he's getting the attention, but he's a really big part of, the Stars. And I really enjoyed him when he was on the Florida Panthers before the Stars signed him. And I was pretty happy when they got him, and it's taken, last year he did really well, but this year he's really, you can just tell he's playing with a lot of confidence right now. And I think he's a huge part of that line. That's, essentially like our top line right now. And he brings a lot on the ice. He's a menace, he's an instigator. He's always in the mix of everything, very high event player. So yeah, he can be polarizing because he does some frustrating things, I think, for fans to watch, especially when it comes to like penalties or, whatever. But this year it seems like he's reined it in a lot, and he's really just getting to, I think, the top of his game.
Yeah, because I remember seeing that contract. I think they signed him for 4 years. I'm just like, oh, that's maybe a little too much, but it sounds like he's like
Hmm.
fit in perfectly and he's well worth that contract. So that's just like another example of Jim No, like knowing exactly what kind of player he wants, and he gets them. And it looks like it's been the same for guys like Matt Dumba and Ilya Bushkin, where I kind of look at the contracts. It's like I don't know, but fits in with the Stars. So like, what do I know? He's the NHL general manager, and I'm
Yeah.
not. I'm just doing a podcast. So, um, I think that's pretty much all the questions I have for the Stars. Like, I just yeah, I'm as a Blackhawks fan, like I look to them as being like the model of how to build a good NHL team. Like it doesn't seem like they rush their prospects. Like you always want to hit on your drafts, and again with really other than Miro Heiskanen being their high end draft pick, we didn't talk like Rupia Hintz was a second round pick in 2015. Like
Hmm.
Thomas Harley, well, a first round pick. Like he was picked in the teams. It's not as if they picked him in the top 10 or top five. So
Yeah.
like I'm and like I envy like how well the Dallas Stars do with their scouting and their pro scouting as well. Like really just from everywhere from top to bottom, from
Hmm.
general manager to the coaches to the players, everyone just seems spot on. Again, I think all they need to do is win a Stanley Cup, and they could be set up to win more in the future. Um, I do appreciate you for coming on.
Yeah.
But I do have a few questions, just like lightning round questions.
Mhm.
What is some of your favorite music, like whether that's an artist, an album, or specific genre of music?
I'm definitely a country fan. I think that's a given
Hmm.
living in Texas. But I do like, I lean a little bit more towards like the Texas country, the red dirt country that we have here. A lot of like
Hmm.
homegrown. I just went to a Cody Johnson concert last weekend, which is like his first stadium tour. But I listened to him when he was just like, small and no one knew who he was. So yeah, that's what I enjoy.
For me with country, I feel it's like such a divisive genre, and I feel like I was kind of on the bandwagon of like, oh, like country's is stupid. But then I listened to a lot of old time country music. Like been listening to a lot of like Hank Williams, Johnny Cash, Dolly
Mm-hmm.
Parton, all that. And it makes me like really appreciate it more. I don't really listen to too much new country, but I would like be willing to give that a try. So,
Yeah.
um, so what are some of your favorite TV shows?
Oh, so I don't watch a lot of TV. I watch like
Hmm.
sports. I watch documentaries. So I work in law
Okay.
enforcement. So crime documentaries always get
Okay.
me.
Okay.
But yeah, like true crime. I don't like Law and Order, like the fake stuff, because
Hmm.
it's not an accurate representation of like what I know the job and the
Hmm.
process to be. But yeah, I love documentaries.
And what are some of your favorite movies?
Oh man. I
Really
couldn't tell
putting you on
you.
the spot.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you the last time I watched a movie. Honestly, like my favorite is like She's the Man, which I know is
Hmm.
like that's from when I was in like high school. But yeah, it's such a good movie.
I haven't watched that in a while either. Well, thank you, Taylor, for coming on. I appreciate you humoring my questions there and talking about the Dallas
Of
Stars.
course.
Maybe sometime in the future we can check in when the Stars are Cup champions or whatever, because it just seems destined that that's going to happen one day.
Hmm. Yeah, thanks for
So
having
yeah,
me.
yeah, of course.